What's going on, guys? You guys know the deal. It's going to be our Summary of Markets Week 55. Then we're going to get into our options watch list after that. So let's get started with SPY. Last week, not a whole lot happened. Pretty much a just consolidation week, little rotation that we're seeing out of big tech sectors. A lot of those momentum stocks that we were seeing the past few months, not really looking too strong last week. They were pretty much red almost the entire week. Some little bounces coming in on Thursday and Friday. But a lot of momentum stocks just getting hammered last week. And you can really see that when you look at the indexes, especially SPY here. So SPY basically had a strong opening on Monday or Tuesday, actually. And then you hit our target around 393.33. You were not able to get above that target for the rest of the week. Sold off again, tried to recover, and then you sold off on the close on Friday. So very, very strong bearish pressure coming in. Looks like it's topping out. Short term, we're definitely getting a little bit of a distribution until we can reclaim like 393 and a quarter. This is just going to be a bearish distribution. Maybe pull back to like 385.75, 383.75. A lot of support back here. So even if it does pull back, this would be a bullish pullback to retest kind of that previous all-time high before we broke out and then had that little distribution. So I wouldn't be too worried if we do see a pullback. As long as that 383 level holds, I think this will continue higher, especially with the stimulus still in talks. I mean, at this point, we really have no idea when the stimulus is going to come out. But while the stimulus is still being talked about in the Senate, we will have that kind of buy pressure just resting below us. So every time that price tries to go down on SPY, it's going to get bought up for the most part until the stimulus is finally released. And at this point, since stimulus has taken so long to be released and you have quote unquote been priced in, who knows if it will actually go up after the stimulus is released. But I think while the stimulus is still being talked about, we have that buy pressure to protect us. So long story short, I think any pullback to 383.75 will be bullish. Look for those targets again around 391, 393 if that does happen. If we do break above 393 to start of next week, maybe a small gap up and then push, look for 399, 400. Very big whole number. You're going to get a lot of sell pressure around there. Probably a lot of people taking profit. Just be on the lookout when we do hit 400. Moving on to gold, nothing really new on gold. Still continuing our downtrend. Failed to break out of the channel, pulled back, failed support, and now we are retesting that lower support that I gave you guys a while back, 1770. So right now it does actually look decently bullish. You do have a couple of dojis down here showing buy pressure, but we're not really seeing any momentum off of this level. So we will have to wait and see if we do get some momentum to push us off this level, maybe break the highs of these dojis, start pushing into 1800. That would be decently bullish. That would kind of confirm that double bottom that we are currently putting in, push up and then break this channel here and then continue higher. Any pullback after breaking that channel would be very bullish because that would put in a bulldog, okay? So no matter where this pullback occurs, as long as it's, I'd say, outside the channel, so around 1840 or above, this would be a bullish pullback. So any pullback in this area or in this area, this would be extremely bullish, okay? But what we need to do before we can even think about that is get out of this channel. So watch for the break of these dojis. The break of like 1790 would be very bullish on gold, but you would still need to get through all this resistance. Okay, so don't get too bullish too early, but breaking those dojis would be very bullish. Now on the other side, if we break these dojis to the downside, let's zoom out a little bit. Do we have any levels back here? Nothing too close. We do have a pivot back here around 1660, but that would be a very strong sell-off. Let's see if we go down to a 4-hour. Do we have any pivots in that area? Okay, yeah, we do have a pivot right here. That'd be kind of what we're looking for. So if this does break these dojis, look for that support kind of around 1750. And then if you can't hold above that, very likely going to sell off pretty strong into the 1650, 1660 area. So be on the lookout for that. Moving on to oil. Oil still continuing its uptrend, doing very, very well here. Momentum very strong. You can see that momentum coming in on Momo. And breaking out into a new high. You did hit our secondary targets here, 59, 60, 50. Both those targets were hit. Little pullback here, but so far still bullish. Let's look at the 4-hour. 4-hour slightly shifting bearish here. You did lose your uptrend on the Momo. You did lose your uptrend on the OTS. You lost that pivot as well. So I'd say short term, you are bearish here, but on the long term, this thing is still incredibly bullish. Okay. Anything above 55 to 54 would be a bullish pullback. Be on the lookout for the 4-hour. As long as you turn green on the OTS again, reclaim that pivot around 61, you should be continuing higher. Look for around 66, 75, maybe even 64 for your local targets. Moving on to Bitcoin, very strong breakout. As we talked about last week, you were breaking your 43,500, 45,600 targets, pushing up into your secondary targets around 52,002 and 54.4. Both those targets have been hit. We do have our final target coming up around 63. I'd be on the lookout around 60,000 as well. Very big whole number, which would be incredible for Bitcoin. It's actually insane that we're looking at Bitcoin at $60,000 right here. But as long as the 4-hour OTS remains bullish, you're continuing to flip pivots and break them bullishly. As long as that continues to happen, this price action is going to continue to push higher. Okay, so right now your line in the sand is that 56,000 pivot, and then you also have the trail right below that around 55,000. You have a fib support around 54.4. So tons of support below you. If you start to break below that pivot, I would start to probably take some profit on my longs, and I wouldn't really look to short it very heavily. With this momentum is so strong that it's basically not worth shorting. Okay, you basically just want to wait for pullbacks, buy the dips, or you just want to hold on to longs. You do not want to be shorting and trying to find these highs, because you are going to get run over, as the shorts have been getting run over for the past few months now. So be very careful trying to short this. I would look for short-term pullbacks to take profit, look for dips to buy. Be careful shorting though. You would have to have a very strong signal, maybe like a 4-hour bear div, a daily bear div, something very strong on the higher time frames before I even thought about shorting. Okay, so be on the lookout for that. Moving on to Ethereum, same thing, incredibly strong here. You are losing momentum a little bit on the daily, slight bear div coming in, but that's just because it's consolidating a little bit here. 4 days of consolidation, little top doji. You are hitting our targets around 1886 and 1962. 2000, very strong hold number. People are selling. If you start to hold above 2000, look for around 2200 and 2250 as your final targets. Okay. Same thing on Ethereum. Be very careful shorting. Anything down to 1650, 1700, very bullish pullback. Most likely will get bought up. Okay. That is the summary of markets. Let's move on to the options watch list. My watch list is getting smaller and smaller as the momentum stocks that I like to trade are just struggling, basically. Most of these stocks that I've been trading the past few months, they just have not been doing very well the past week. So I'm just dwindling down my watch list, trying to find stocks that still look good, still have the patterns that I like. And right now, there really isn't many stocks like that. Looking at Square, you're already hitting most of our targets. It's very extended. So unless you're already holding Square, very hard to buy Square up here. But if you are still holding, look for 285 and 289 as your next targets. Small support at 265 must hold, or the bulls are going to lose control of that. Moving on to Cloud, you popped up, you hit our target around 3038, pulled back to retest the 29 support, and now we're bouncing a little bit, but it's already selling off. If you can hold above 2950, look for that 3050 and that 3060 targets above you. Moving on to NVIDIA, still playing out that breakout that I told you guys. If it broke above 550, you are going to start a new impulse. You are still currently in that impulse. You did put in a new pivot around 602, which you are currently failing. If you can hold above that pivot at 602, look for the target at 612 to be hit again. You already hit it before, probably hit it one more time. And then 620 would be your new target. And then you have targets around 640, 655. Support at 580 must hold. Moving on to Intel. Intel also looking very good. You have a lot of the chip manufacturers, NVIDIA, AMD, SMH, the Index, TSM, all the chip manufacturers doing very well. Intel breaking all of our targets, 5750, 5880, 61, all of them being hit. Pulled back to retest our 61 target, and now we're pushing higher. Very good volume on Friday. Looks like it wants to continue. 64 was the other target that I gave you guys. Be on the lookout for that. If you can break above 64, keep an eye on 66. 61 support must hold, or that's going to go lower. Pin doesn't look too bad here, hitting our target around 121 for the second time. Look for the next target around 124 and 126 pivot. If you can hold above that pivot, above 126, look for 135 breakout target. Support at 110 must hold here. DraftKings also looks really good. I called out a lotto on, was that Friday or Thursday? I called out a lotto on Thursday, the $60 call lottos. Sadly, I did not take it. I wanted to wait for the open to buy the open because I thought the open was going to be very strong, which it was, but it gapped up. So we missed a big opportunity there. Those contracts went up like 1,400%. They were only like 16 cents. They went to close to $2. So massive, massive gain there. But it still looks like it wants to continue higher. I think you could get 62, could get 65 pivot before going lower, but you do have a big gap below you now. So be on the lookout for a gap fill. If you do go down to fill that gap around 58 and a quarter, that would be bullish as long as you held above the gap. Okay. So be on the lookout for that. Hold above the gap, look for 64. Airbnb still looks pretty strong, pulling back to retest your initial breakout point. As long as you hold above 187, 194, this should continue higher. Look for 210, 212, and 218. Zoom continuing to hit our targets. I told you guys above 400, you were going to get 425 and 445. Both those targets were hit. If you hold above 445, look for 475 and 517. Those are your next targets moving forward. ROKU pulling back to retest your initial all-time high. 448, 456, strong support. Look for around 480 to 490 as your initial targets. And then after that, look for 510. Support at 450 must hold. FedEx did exactly what we talked about, pulled back above that VWEB, held that 255 support, pushed higher to hit our first target around 262. You could not continue up into our 272 target, though. Volume is pretty low. Inverse head and shoulders being put in currently, so as long as you hold above VWEB, above 251, this should continue higher. Okay, so hold above 251, 255 needs to hold as well. Hold above 255, you should be able to get to 272. PLTR, nasty sell-off, but you did have a lot of buyers come in around that 25 to 26 area down here on this doji, and then we gapped up with a pivot, so it looks like it is trying to bottom. Buyers are stepping in very heavily. You have people like Kathy Wood also buying a shit ton of shares, so this thing could continue very easily. Look for a break of 31, little resistance at 32. Your first target would be around 36, and then your main target would be that pivot around 39.50. Laser, another one that I'm still watching, putting in a bunch of buy signals, holding this massive distribution. You have the 50-day moving average and the trail below you. If you can break that pivot around 36, you could easily go to that $40 target. TDOC finally hit our final target at 301, pulled back to retest the targets around 276 and 281, and now it looks like it wants to continue higher. You do have earnings coming up, though, so watch the run-up into earnings. If it does give you a nice run-up, you could just sell the run-up, but I wouldn't play earnings. I don't play earnings usually ever. Every time I do play earnings, I lose. So just understand that earnings is a gamble, but this does look very good going into earnings. NNOX is one that I started accumulating. It did get a little bloody, sold off a little bit. If this thing doesn't find any buyers on Monday or Tuesday, I probably will cut it. But if it does start to pick up back above 59.50, look for that resistance around 63.50 to be hit, and then around 70 as your main bounce target. Couple of these other things I'm just starting to accumulate for longer term. These are all my leap positions. I'm starting to accumulate McDonald's in this range. I like it above this range. If it gets above 218, you could go for a run into the 230s. Same thing with Ford. I'm still holding my Ford long term. I like this above 11.50, above $11. Still very strong. I think you get 12.50, 13 pretty soon. You just need some more volume. I'm still holding my XLP long-term position. Little inverse head and shoulders coming up. As long as this thing holds like 63, I'm not worried about it. A little bit of a sector rotation coming in, but still looks strong. CVS getting a little weak. If CVS doesn't hold this trend, I am going to cut my long-term CVS position. You are still distributing, but it failed the earnings. You tried to bounce after earnings. It just couldn't do it. So the buyers are weak here. Not looking to hold on to it much longer. These other things are just SPACs that I'm holding on to. I got in most of these SPACs very low around their initial entry at $10. So I'm just going to hold on to these to see what they can do for the next few months. FCAC was one of the SPACs that I'm in. Very strong bounce off VWEB on Thursday. Very good confirmation on Friday. Watch this thing for a Monday, Tuesday run. But most of these breakouts on FCAC have been failed almost immediately. So I wouldn't be too anxious to buy the breakout in this thing because the breakouts are not very stable. Another thing that I am accumulating is this new ETF based on streaming services. They basically hold a position in almost every big streaming stock. Their biggest positions are Spotify, Roku, Netflix, and they have everything else like Discovery, Amazon, Disney. They basically have all of them. So I'm going to start accumulating this thing. I'll happily buy this down to like $10. So that's a very long-term play. Finally, let's move on to big tech. I did make some new analysis on this recently, so let's go over here. Microsoft has decent momentum, but you are curling over, kind of putting in a top here. The momentum is slowing. You're still bullish. The momentum is still bullish long-term, short-term pulling back. If you can hold above 236 on this next pullback, I think you could easily get 246 into breakout around 250 to 257. You have to hold that pivot at 235. Moving on to Apple, I do like Apple here. It pulled back to retest the support. You did have a pivot. I think it was on a lower time frame, but big support coming in down here on these lower levels. If it can hold and break above like 132, very easily could fill the gap at 133 and then look for around 138 as your main target. Facebook still looking very weak. Nasty sell-off on Friday, which led most of the tech sector to sell off. You have a couple gap fills below you around 255 and what is that, 251. So a couple of gaps down here that are partially filled that could get fully filled if this does continue lower. That would be your main bearish target. And then you also have a pivot around 247, which could act as support. Big sell volume coming in on Friday makes this move look very bearish. Until you reclaim 272, I would not be bullish on Facebook. And even then, you have to reclaim this downtrend to look very bullish long term. Netflix, as I always tell you guys, loves to fill its gaps. You have a couple gaps below you, and you also have a couple gaps above you as well. So if you push up, your main targets would be around 557 and 551. And then if you go down, you have that partial gap fill around 216 all the way down to 516 all the way down to 500. That would be the main bearish target. I would not be too bullish on Netflix until that gap gets filled. Because of Netflix's nature, it likes to fill all of its gaps. Amazon was starting to look pretty bullish. You even pulled back to retest the triangle, and then you looked like you were going to bounce out of it. But then you had a nasty sell-off on Friday, mainly probably due to the sell-off in Facebook. You do have a strong support around 3,200. If that does hold, you could continue higher. Break 3,200. You have the triangle, the trend here, to protect you. But if you break this little area down here, you most likely will go to 30.50 and 29.60. If you do somehow get back above 3,300, 3,350, look for 34.42 and 35.22. Last but not least, Tesla, as I told you guys in Discord, looked pretty bad. You were losing a lot of support. Nobody wants to buy Tesla up here. Until Tesla reclaims like 830 to 850, I would not be bullish on Tesla. This could be putting in kind of a somewhat of a bulldog here if it does bottom immediately on Monday or Tuesday. But like I said, you would still have to break through around 850 to even look bullish into like 900, 960. For now, I would probably target around 745, 735. You also have a gap fill around 704, which would be your main bearish target. Okay, so I would not try to knife catch this unless you came all the way back down to the gap fill, and I would not try to buy breakouts until you at least get above 850. But all right, guys, that was the summary of markets and the options watch list. If you guys like this video, make sure to hit that like button, and I will see you guys for our live trading session tomorrow at 9:30. See you later, guys.